Thank you for being here tonight. This is Way North Sleep Lab, a quiet space for sleep stories, gentle visualizations, and peaceful journeys into rest. Tonight, let's drift through the story of Casanova, the man who walked Venice's quiet bridges at dawn, who wrote by candlelight, and who knew the weight of a worn passport and the comfort of a familiar cafe. This is a gentle sleep story for adults seeking deep relaxation and peaceful dreams. A special thanks to Eleanor Finch for writing this story and to Claire Morgan for narrating. If you'd like more gentle stories like this, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps us create more peaceful journeys for your rest.
Before we begin, find a comfortable position. Dim the lights or turn them off completely. Close your eyes when you're ready. There's no pressure here, no expectations, just calm. You don't need to follow every word. If you drift off before the end, that's perfect. That's exactly what we want. Let your body grow heavy. Let your breath slow. Let yourself be carried. Take a moment now and feel the support of the bed beneath you. Feel how the mattress holds you, how the pillow cradles the weight of your head. You don't need to do anything else but be here. Now, gently, bring your attention to your breath. Breathe in slowly through your nose, filling your lungs with calm, cool air. And breathe out through your mouth, releasing, letting go. With each breath out, you release a little more. A little more tension leaves your body. If your mind wanders, that's perfectly fine. If you drift away before the end, that's exactly what we want. There is no test, no right way to listen. Just let the words wash over you, like rain on glass. You are safe here. There is nowhere you need to be right now. Nothing you need to solve. Nothing you need to hold. If thoughts come, let them float by like slow clouds in a quiet night sky. You don't have to follow them. You can simply return to the feeling of your breath and the gentle weight of your body. In this moment, you are safe. You are supported, and you can rest. Take one more slow breath in, and a long, soft breath out. And if sleep is close, you can let it come. naturally, quietly, in its own time. Now let's turn to tonight's story. Venice in the 18th century is a city of water and light. Not the bright, bustling light of midday, but the softer kind. The glow that comes from oil lamps reflected in canal water at dusk, from candles behind leaded glass windows, from the particular amber of a setting sun caught between buildings so close together you can almost touch both walls at once. The stone is warm here, even in winter. The marble steps leading down to the water have been touched by so many hands, so many feet, that they curve slightly inward, smooth as river stones. The bridges are narrow, intimate. You hear footsteps approaching long before you see anyone. The sound carries differently over water. In the mornings, the city smells of coffee and sea salt, of bread baking in wood-fired ovens, of the mineral scent of canal water mixed with the sweetness of pastries dusted with sugar. The air is soft, slightly humid, even in cold months. This is the world Giacomo Casanova knew first, not as history, but as home. The particular creak of a gondola, the way voices carry across water at night, the weight of a velvet cloak in February, the scratch of quill on paper in a rented room where the floorboards slope toward the canal. The light here changes constantly, but gently. Morning light is pearl grey, filtered through mist. Afternoon light turns the water gold. Evening light makes everything softer, blurs the edges of buildings, turns windows into squares of honey-coloured warmth. In Casanova's time, Venice was filled with small moments of beauty that cost nothing. The pattern frost makes on a window pane, the way shadows fall across a campo at 3 in the afternoon, the sound of someone practicing violin in a room you'll never see, the smell of wood smoke from chimneys mixing with the salt air. There were libraries here, quiet rooms lined with books bound in leather, their spines stamped with gold. Rooms where the only sounds were pages turning, the occasional cough, the scratch of someone taking notes. The smell of old paper, beeswax polish, ink. There were cafes where you could sit for hours with a single cup of coffee, watching the light change, listening to conversations in 4 languages, feeling the warmth of the cup in your hands. There were theatres, yes, but also the moments before and after. The rustle of silk in crowded corridors, the waxy smell of stage makeup, the particular quiet that falls over an audience just before the curtain rises, everyone holding their breath together. This was the texture of daily life. Linen shirts dried in attic windows, laundry lines strung between buildings like the city's own bunting, wool blankets, heavy and rough, that smelled of lanolin and sleep, the cool smoothness of marble under your palm as you steadied yourself on a bridge, the sound of church bells marking the hours, not harsh, but part of the day's rhythm, as natural as breathing. Giacomo Casanova was born in Venice in 1725, in the spring. His mother was an actress, which meant his earliest memories were probably of theatres. the dusty backstage areas, the particular quality of lamplight from behind, the rustle of costumes, voices practicing lines. His father died when Giacomo was young. In some sources, we read of a childhood marked by uncertainty, by being sent to different households, by the particular loneliness of a clever child who doesn't quite fit. But let's imagine the quiet moments, the small comforts. A warm bowl of soup on a cold evening, the weight of a blanket, the sound of rain on a tile roof. The particular pleasure of learning to read, of discovering that marks on paper could open entire worlds. He was educated, first locally, then at the University of Padua. Picture this: a young man walking to lectures in the early morning, breath visible in cold air, carrying books wrapped in cloth to protect them from the weather. The lecture halls were cold, warmed only by the presence of many students sitting close together on wooden benches, worn smooth by generations. The scratch of pen on paper, taking notes in margins, the weight of textbooks, their pages thick with knowledge accumulated over centuries. The particular tiredness that comes from reading by candlelight, eyes straining, but mind awake and hungry. In some accounts, Casanova studied law, philosophy, medicine, sampling different ways of understanding the world, trying on different futures like coats, seeing which fit. The university towns of that era had their own rhythms: morning lectures, afternoon study, evenings in small rooms where students would debate ideas over cheap wine and bread. The cold of unheated rooms, the warmth of intellectual excitement, the friendships formed over shared confusion about a Latin text. There's something gentle in imagining him as a student, not yet the figure of legend, just a young man trying to understand his place in the world, staying up too late, reading by guttering candlelight, falling asleep over books, waking with the imprint of pages on his cheek. The smell of ink becomes familiar, almost comforting. The texture of paper, smooth or rough, thick or thin, becomes as significant as the words written on it. The particular pleasure of a well-made book, tight binding, clean printing, wide margins for notes. In Venice, between terms, he would have returned to familiar places, the same bridges, the same cafes, but seeing them now with new eyes, with ideas from Aristotle or Aquinas colouring how he understood the light on water, the pattern of the city, the way people moved through space. Education in that era was as much about learning to observe as it was about learning to think. How to notice the world, how to remember it, how to describe it accurately. The discipline of attention. Perhaps he kept notebooks even then, recording not just facts for examinations, but observations. The colour of the sky before rain, an overheard conversation, the way candlelight looked through amber glass, a phrase in French that captured something he'd been trying to express. The texture of student life, woolen scarves against cold mornings, the taste of bitter coffee, bread hard enough that you had to tear it with your teeth, cheese sharp and crumbling, wine that warmed your chest and made difficult concepts seem suddenly clear. The particular exhaustion of examination time, when you'd reviewed your notes so many times the words stopped making sense. When you'd walk outside and the ordinary world, trees, sky, people buying bread, would seem miraculous just because it existed outside of books. And then the examinations would end, and there would be that strange mixture of relief and loss, of having finished something but not knowing yet what comes next. What does it mean to live a life? Not the grand moments, but the daily texture. How you take your coffee, where you walk when you need to think, the weight of your coat, the books you carry, the letters you write. Casanova's life spanned much of the 18th century, and he moved through many places: Venice, Paris, London, Prague, Vienna, St. Petersburg. But every place had its daily rhythms, its small rituals. The morning routine, washing with cold water from a porcelain basin, the shock of it waking you fully. Dressing, the layers of clothing in that era, each piece with its own purpose, its own texture. Linen shirts, wool waistcoats, silk cravats that had to be tied just so. The small vanity of wanting to look presentable, even when no one of importance would see you. The ritual of writing letters. In an era before telephones, letters were how you maintained friendships, conducted business, thought through ideas. The process itself had weight. Selecting paper, preparing ink, sharpening a quill, settling at a desk with good light. The particular pleasure of a well-written letter received, breaking the seal, unfolding it carefully, recognizing the handwriting, hearing the voice of the writer in your mind as you read. The way you'd read especially good letters more than once, folding them away to keep. Coffee houses were central to life in 18th century Europe. Not just places to drink coffee, but places to read newspapers, meet friends, conduct business, escape cold rooms, warm your hands around a cup while watching the world pass by outside. The coffee itself was stronger then, more bitter, served in small cups. You'd drink it slowly, making it last, because each cup cost something, and time was the real luxury. Time to sit, to think, to observe. The rustle of newspapers, the murmur of conversations, the clink of cups on saucers, the scratch of pen on paper as someone worked at a corner table. These were the soundscape of intellectual life. Libraries too. Casanova was a voracious reader, and libraries in that era were sanctuaries. Quiet, warm in winter, the books themselves provided insulation, filled with a kind of purposeful silence. The hush that falls over a room of people all focused on reading, everyone lost in their own world, yet somehow together. The smell of old books, that particular combination of paper, leather, dust, and time. The weight of a folio, the delicacy of turning aged pages, the pleasure of finding exactly the passage you needed, or discovering something unexpected that changed how you thought about everything. Walking was how people moved through cities. Not exercise, but transportation, meditation, social life. The pace was slower. There was time to notice things, architectural details, the play of light on stone, faces in windows, merchants arranging displays, the season's first flowers, the last leaves of autumn. Casanova walked through many cities, and each had its own personality. Venice's narrow calle and sudden campos, Paris's broad boulevards, London's parks and fog, Prague's hills and spires. The experience of being lost in a new city, not frightening but freeing, every turn a possibility. Meals in that era were long, social events. Even simple meals, bread, cheese, fruit, wine. The pleasure of sharing food, of conversation that wandered from topic to topic, of arguments conducted without anger, of ideas examined from all sides, like interesting stones found on a beach. The bread would be dense, substantial, often dark. You'd tear pieces off, spread them with butter or soft cheese. Wine would be poured from ceramic jugs, often watered, drunk throughout the meal. Conversation was the main course. In winter, there was always the challenge of cold. Rooms were heated by fireplaces or small stoves, but the heat didn't reach evenly. You'd position yourself near the fire, feeling warmth on your face while your back stayed cold. At night, you'd warm bricks or stones in the fire, wrap them in cloth, place them in your bed before climbing in. The weight of wool blankets, sometimes 4 or 5 deep. The luxury of warmth, of being cocooned against the cold, of reading by candlelight in bed, with your breath visible in the air beyond the blanket's edge. The sound of wind outside, of shutters creaking, of city night sounds muffled by cold air, distant bells, the watch calling the hours, dogs barking, someone's late footsteps on cobblestones. And then morning again, the cold shock of leaving bed, the ritual of dressing, the first coffee, the day beginning anew with its small pleasures and obligations, its moments of warmth and connection, its quiet satisfactions. Casanova kept notebooks throughout his life, not diaries exactly, but records of what he saw, heard, learned. These accumulated into a kind of personal library, a collection of experiences converted into text. Imagine the physical objects, leather-bound notebooks of varying sizes, some pocket-sized for jotting quick notes while travelling, others large enough for extended entries. Pages filled with handwriting that changed over decades, youthful and energetic early on, more measured and careful in later years. The act of writing as a way of understanding experience. Something happens, and in the happening, it's just sensation, emotion, confusion. But later, sitting with pen and paper, you can shape it into narrative, find the meaning, decide what matters. He wrote in multiple languages, Italian, French, some Latin, sometimes mixing them in the same passage. Language not just as communication, but as texture, as music, each tongue offering different ways to capture nuance. The scratch of quill on paper becomes meditative. The need to occasionally stop, sharpen the nib, replenish ink. These small pauses built into the process, forcing you to slow down, to consider. Many sources describe Casanova as someone who collected people, not in the sense of using them, but of genuinely wanting to understand them, to know their stories. Each person was a text to be read, a mystery with layers. The merchant who travelled to Constantinople and could describe the way morning light looked on the Bosphorus. The actress who could quote Molière and explain the subtle difference between performing tragedy and performing someone performing tragedy. The scholar who devoted 20 years to understanding a single philosophical problem. These encounters, over coffee or dinner or long night conversations, were education of a different kind than university offered. The curriculum was human experience. The textbooks were living people. The examinations were in understanding, empathy, connection. In Paris, he moved through salons, those peculiar institutions of 18th century intellectual life where ideas were currency and conversation was art. Picture these: candlelit rooms, people seated in clusters, voices rising and falling, laughter, debate, the clink of glasses. The skill required to navigate such spaces, knowing when to speak and when to listen, how to disagree without offending, how to make a point through a well-told story rather than direct argument, how to be interesting without dominating, how to draw others out. Someone would mention a new book, and the room would divide into those who'd read it and those who hadn't, those who loved it and those who found it overrated. The conversation would branch: philosophy, politics, poetry, science, gossip, all woven together. The hostess moving through the room, ensuring everyone had wine, introducing strangers, redirecting conversations that grew too heated, creating space for shy brilliance to emerge alongside confident eloquence. These were Casanova's universities, perhaps more than Padua, learning to navigate different kinds of intelligence, different ways of being clever, different forms of wisdom. There were mistakes, of course, times when he misread a situation, said the wrong thing, offended someone, found himself suddenly persona non grata. The particular pain of social exile, of doors closing, of invitations that stopped coming. But mistakes, too, are education. They teach boundaries, consequences, the ways that reputation is both more fragile and more resilient than you think. How it takes years to build and moments to damage. But also how people sometimes forgive, forget, offer second chances. In many accounts, we see Casanova moving between worlds, aristocratic salons and bohemian gatherings, official receptions and underground meetings. The skill of being able to speak multiple social languages, to fit in nowhere completely, but be welcome almost anywhere. This requires a kind of performance, yes. Being aware of yourself as others see you, adjusting your presentation. But it also requires authenticity, genuine curiosity, the ability to find common ground with almost anyone. The nobleman who collected butterflies and the printer who set type by hand might seem to inhabit different planets, but both were passionate about precision, about beauty in small details, about work done carefully. Finding these connections was its own art. Letters became another kind of library. Casanova maintained correspondences across Europe. Friends, former lovers, intellectual sparring partners, people he'd met once and liked enough to keep in touch with through yearly letters. The pleasure of receiving letters from faraway places, breaking the seal, and suddenly being transported to Prague or London or Madrid through someone else's observations. The way a good letter writer could make you smell the coffee they were drinking, feel the weather they were describing, understand their thoughts, not just as ideas, but as lived experience. And the responsibility of writing back, of reciprocating that gift. Taking time to craft something worth reading, to select details that would interest rather than bore, to ask questions that showed you'd paid attention, to maintain connection across distance and time. These accumulated letters, ones received and copies of ones sent, formed another kind of notebook, another record of a life lived in many places, in many languages, in connection with many minds. As Casanova aged, his relationship with time shifted. Early in life, time feels infinite. There's always tomorrow, next year, someday. But gradually, you begin to see the shape of your life, to understand that choices foreclose other choices, that the paths not taken fade into permanent might-have-beens. In his later years, Casanova worked as a librarian at Castle Dux in Bohemia. After a life of movement, of new cities and new faces, he found himself in a remote castle, surrounded by books, with time to reflect. Imagine this: morning light through library windows, dust motes floating in sunbeams, the smell of old paper and leather bindings, the particular silence of a room full of books, thousands of volumes, and the task of cataloguing them, of creating order, of making knowledge accessible. The physicality of the work, climbing ladders to reach high shelves, carefully removing books, noting their titles and conditions, cleaning bindings with soft cloths, arranging them by subject or author or size. The weight of heavy folios, the delicacy of handling fragile pages, the satisfaction of a shelf properly organized. Books become companions in a different way when you work among them daily. Not just texts to be read, but objects with presence, with history. This book was printed in Venice in 1650. You can imagine the printer selecting type, the pages drying in sunlight. This one has margin notes in faded ink. Someone read it carefully, argued with it, thought alongside it. In many sources, we read that Casanova used this time to write his memoirs, Histoire de ma vie. 12 volumes, eventually, thousands of pages, an attempt to capture a life in words. The project of memoir is fascinating, deciding what matters, what to include, what to leave out. Memory itself is unreliable. You think you remember a conversation, but do you remember the actual words, or your subsequent understanding of what was said? You remember a room, but is it the room as it was, or as you've imagined it became? Writing about the past changes your relationship with it. Events that seemed important at the time fade into footnotes. Moments you barely noticed turn out to be pivotal. The narrative you thought you were living wasn't quite the story that emerged when you tried to tell it. And there's the question of honesty. How much to reveal? How much to conceal? In memoir, you're both subject and author, both revealing yourself and creating yourself on the page. The tension between truth and discretion, between accuracy and kindness, between what happened and what it meant. Casanova wrote in French, which was not his native language, but the international language of his era. This choice itself interesting, describing your life in a language that requires you to think differently, that doesn't hold all your childhood associations, that creates a slight distance between lived experience and written account. The routine of writing, every morning, after breakfast, returning to the desk. The manuscript growing slowly, page by page. Some days the words flow easily, memories vivid and immediate. Other days, nothing. Staring at blank paper, the past feeling distant and strange, the whole project seeming impossible. But returning the next day anyway. The discipline of showing up, of trusting the process, of knowing that some writing days feel better than others, but the work accumulates regardless. Outside the library windows, seasons changed. Spring brought birdsong and longer days, the green smell of growing things. Summer warmed the stones of the castle walls, made afternoon drowsy, turned evening into gold. Autumn brought cooler air, the sound of wind in trees losing their leaves, the particular slant of light that makes everything look both beautiful and sad. Winter closed in again, cold and quiet, time slowing, the world narrowing to the space you can heat, the books you can reach, the memories you can capture. In this quieter life, perhaps there was time to notice things that the earlier, busier years had obscured. The pattern frost makes on windows, the way afternoon light falls across library shelves, making some book spines glow, while others recede into shadow. The sound of your own footsteps in empty corridors, the taste of simple food eaten alone, the particular quality of solitude after years of society. Not loneliness exactly, or not only loneliness, but space to think without immediately having to articulate thoughts, to remember without immediately having to defend or explain memories, to be oneself without performance. Letters still arrived, less frequently now. Friends aging, dying, the generation that had known him young gradually disappearing. Each death was a kind of erasure. The only person who remembered a particular night in Paris in 1752 was gone, and now that night existed only in your memory, unverifiable, becoming more mythical with each year. This too is part of aging, becoming the keeper of stories no one else can confirm or deny. Your past becomes increasingly your own creation, your authority on your own life becoming absolute as witnesses disappear. But there's freedom in this too. The past can be shaped, can be made into narrative, can be understood as a story with themes and motifs, rather than just one damned thing after another. The chaos of lived experience can be given structure, meaning, beauty even. The sun sets earlier now. The library grows dark before dinner. You light candles, familiar ritual, the scratch of flint on steel, the small flame catching, growing. Multiple candles making the darkness comfortable rather than frightening. The pages of the manuscript accumulate. Years of life, thousands of encounters, hundreds of cities, all being converted into text, into something that might outlast memory, might outlast even the life being remembered. In the end, what remains? Not the grand gestures, perhaps, but the small textures, the weight of a book in your hands, the taste of good coffee, the sound of rain, the warmth of candlelight, the pleasure of conversation that goes deep, the comfort of silence that doesn't need filling. Casanova died in 1798 at Castle Dux in his 73rd year. Outside, the world was changing rapidly. Revolution in France, war, the old order crumbling. But inside the library, time moved differently, measured in pages read, pages written, seasons passing, the slow accumulation of days. What does it mean to have lived well? Not perfectly. Perfection isn't a category that applies to human lives. But well, with curiosity, with engagement, with attention to the world's beauty and complexity, with willingness to learn, to change, to see yourself clearly without too much judgment. The notebooks he kept, the letters he wrote, the memoirs he completed, these are gifts to the future, ways of saying, I was here, this is what I saw, this is what it felt like to be alive in this particular time and place. But the greater gift, perhaps, is the example of paying attention, noticing the texture of daily life, valuing conversation and friendship, being interested in people across all kinds of boundaries, finding beauty in ordinary moments, understanding that a life worth remembering is made of thousands of unremarkable days, each one lived fully. The leather notebook from the beginning of our story. Imagine closing it now. The pressed flower, the theatre ticket, the sketched mask. These fragments of a life, random and precious, hinting at stories we'll never fully know. Outside the Café Florian, the rain has stopped. The piazza is empty, wet stone reflecting lamplight. It's late now, very late, and Venice sleeps. You could leave the notebook here, return to your warm bed, let these stories rest. Or you could turn another page, find another fragment, follow another thread into the past. But perhaps it's enough, for tonight, to have glimpsed a life, not in its legendary moments, but in its daily textures, its ordinary humanities, its persistence in noticing, in recording, in trying to understand. The candle burns low, the coffee has gone cold, the notebook remains, pages gently riffled by a breeze from the open window. Let yourself rest now. Let the images fade. The library at Dux, the bridges of Venice, the candlelit salons, the morning walks, the scratch of pen on paper. Let it all recede into the gentle darkness. Sleep now. The rain outside has become very gentle, almost imperceptible, more a thickening of the air than distinct drops. The notebook rests on the marble table, closed now, the leather warm from your hands. Venice at this hour is all reflection and shadow. Lamplight doubled in water, stone walls holding the day's warmth, the particular quiet that comes when a city finally releases its breath. You could walk outside now, follow the narrow streets back toward wherever you're staying. But there's no hurry. The cafe will remain open a while longer. The table is comfortable. The rain-cool air through the window feels good. Somewhere in this city, beneath all the layers of time, the past persists. in the stones worn smooth by countless footsteps, in the buildings that have sheltered centuries of human life, in the water that reflects every era's light in exactly the same way. The notebook will wait. The stories will wait. Everything can wait. Let your breathing slow. Let your eyes close. Let yourself drift. As Venice itself drifts between water and sky, between past and present, between waking and sleep. Rest now. You are now free. Everything you needed to do today is done. The stillness grows around you like a soft cloud. You are free from the day, free from worry, free from obligations. There is nothing you need to carry now, nothing you need to solve, nothing you need to plan. You are held gently by this moment. You are allowed to be soft in this moment. You can rest without asking for permission. This is your time, your peace, your rest. You are protected here. You are safe here. You are wrapped in calm. Rest is like a friend opening their arms to you. Sleep comes to you like a natural wave. There is no wrong way to rest. You don't need to try. You don't need to do anything. Just be. Just release. Just rest. You are safe to fall asleep. You sink into peace. Your body heals, regenerates, strengthens. As you drift into beautiful dreams, your subconscious mind absorbs the following affirmations. I am falling into a peaceful and relaxing sleep. I am relaxing each of my muscles. With every second, they become warmer and heavier. I sleep deeply and well. I let my breath take me deeper. I dream of beautiful places. My body is completely relaxed. My mind is safe in its own space.